I'm Michael Hentrich.
I'm Adonia Hentrich.
Yeah, I my parents didn't talk with me about sex very much. I'm kind of straining to try to think of what might have been talked about. There wasn't much. Yeah, I kind of had to figure things out. They taught me to save myself for marriage, to not have sex, not have a relationship with a girl until I was married. Basically told me to wait till marriage, but there wasn't really any education or conversation on what to do when I got there.
How did you learn what sex was?
Friends. I mean, and the internet was starting to become more widely accessible at that time.
Yeah, for myself, also my parents didn't tell me, we didn't sit down and have a talk about the birds and the bees. Similarly, yeah, I was very much encouraged to save myself for marriage, and that it would be a good thing. I know some people are really like, sex is bad, boys are bad, don't look, don't see, don't touch, and I was grateful my parents weren't like heavy on the negative side. They did say, sex was going to be a great thing, but they didn't also explain what it was really. So actually, it really wasn't until after I was married and having sex that then my mom was like, yeah, sex could be like this sometimes, or it could be like that. But it was like the first time we ever had a conversation about sex. So yeah, for myself, I mean, I think like anatomy books in school, just kind of like listening in on my classmates' conversations and things was how I, reading some books, generally got the idea of how that would work. Oh yeah, definitely curious. If I did happen to read a book that had some, especially as I got older, I was reading more mature books into like high school, then there would be some sex scene described in the book or something, and I'd be like, oh, okay, let's figure this out. I wasn't interested in talking to my friends about it. I didn't like the way my friends talked about sex. But I also didn't talk to my parents about it. It's funny because just last night, my daughter told me that she had a crush on 3 boys in her class. And at first I was like, are you serious? What kind? Really? But at the same time, I was really grateful because I remembered I was 6 when I had my first crush, but I didn't tell my parents or I didn't tell anybody about it. So I was grateful that she did talk to me and we had a conversation about it. So my 6-year-old daughter is farther ahead than I was, probably when I was 12 or 13. One of our saving graces was that when we were engaged and before we did have sex, I had a good friend who gave me a book called The Act of Love. And she was like, you got to read this book before you do anything. and it's a huge help. And it was. We read it. Yeah. We weren't even together at the time, but we got each got a copy, and we read it and talked about it after every chapter, and that was probably the biggest preparation we had. And we talked after every chapter.
We did? Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't remember, but I'm glad we did. Yeah, I had kind of a mother figure type person that I talked to sometimes about these kind of things. Sometimes it was helpful, sometimes it wasn't, but I was grateful that I had somebody, Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just didn't feel comfortable talking to my parents. Middle school was tough for me. There was quite a bit of boyfriends and girlfriends and just sexuality in nature in general in school. We had quite a few kids I was in a Catholic school, and we had quite a few kids who were kicked out of the public school that ended up in that school. So it was kind of an interesting dynamic. But I think what helped me was kind of not really my own doing, but more or less I wasn't very appealing, I guess, to girls. Didn't get very many approaching me wanting to go out or be their boyfriend or something like that. Just didn't happen very much. Almost never. So high school was, I went to a different private school. It was like a Protestant school. And people are very focused on a lot of people are just really focused on their relationship with God and reading the Bible and Yeah, I mean, there was just the whole boyfriend girlfriend thing was just not as big of a dynamic there. It just wasn't as big of a. It wasn't like a main thing for a lot of people's lives. They were focused on studying. They were focused on their faith. They were focused on sports, other things, but boys and girls not as much, which was kind of surprising to me because I thought that high school would be worse than middle school or harder than middle school. Actually, ended up being easier. I think it would have been hard for me if I was very handsome or very attractive in some way. I think it worked in my favor that for one reason or another, I just wasn't that appealing to girls. Because I think I would have been pretty susceptible in that way. But I really tried to hold on to the idea of my future marriage, that it was going to be worth waiting for. It was going to be really great. It was going to be all the things that I was missing out on now, but even better, even though I didn't really know what that would look like.
I was just kind of piecing together overheard conversations of my classmates, books that I read, movies. Movies definitely had a more visual imprint of what it would be like. I think that's how most people get their ideas of sex from a young age. Yeah, well, it was kind of cool. We had planned a honeymoon, and so we had decided to read the book before the honeymoon, leading up to it. I wouldn't say our sex was glorious on our first couple tries for a while, probably. But the cool thing is that it was all fun and exploratory and new, and so it didn't matter, at least to me, how movie quality it was. It was didn't have anything to compare it to previously, so I wasn't disappointed by anything. It was I thought it was really fun.
I think that for a lot of couples, there's especially if you're not in a committed relationship, there's pressure to be really good in bed, to be able to do all the right things and to turn your husband or your wife on. And
you have to be able to undo the bra strap on the first try, right?
Yeah,
That's
you have to know the techniques and be able to. If you're a guy, you have to be able to last a long time, and all these different things that there's a lot of pressure that if you can't satisfy them sexually, then maybe they don't want to be with you. And what I really appreciate, like Adonia said, is that because we already committed ourselves in marriage, we didn't have that. I mean, of course, healthy, good sex is important for the well-being of our marriage, but it wasn't like, oh, if you're not good in bed, I don't love you or something like that. I don't want to be with you. We could grow and learn together and make mistakes without the pressure of feeling like if I don't perform well for my wife,
she's gonna leave me and
she's
find
gonna leave
somebody
me or
better.
gonna find someone better or something like that.
I think it was really helpful that we had started talking about it ahead of time, and with that book, and having conversations about it beforehand, because it definitely was an awkward topic to talk about, in words in real life. It's just saying what the words related to sex was hard. Having grown up really protected and sheltered and stuff. So I think it was a practice leading up to it and was helpful. Still was hard sometimes. A lot of the time, I think it was figure out developing a relationship and continuing it and going deeper, and both. I think communication is so important, and for even us just figuring out regular communication, not even about a sexual relationship, but how to understand each other's past and how to trust each other. Even those kind of conversations, I think, are not easy for most people. And then to take it to a sexual level also is not easy. But I think that because we were so committed to our relationship and creating a future that we wanted, we kind of stuck it out with each other, waited through the long silences or past the first words we would say to hear the words that the other person actually wanted to say. It was definitely a process. It wasn't natural or easy or fast.
I think there's also a little bit of a stigma around talking about sex. I think that the general idea behind sex is you want to make the other person happy. And I think that for myself, I think a big hurdle that I had was sharing with her, what I liked. I remember when we got into conversations about what we each other liked, that was actually really liberating because, I don't know, it just didn't seem like we could talk about it.
Well, I initiated that we read this book together and talk about that. But I think I didn't. I mean, I was all focused on our honeymoon and like making that work and making that a good experience. And I hadn't really been thinking beyond that. And yeah, I remember we got back from our honeymoon and then like the next day, Mike like wants to have sex again. I'm like, really? Because we just did that. Like, yeah, figuring out our different sex drives and and expectations that we had of each other took time. And I think that maybe because Mike is more of the visually stimulated, more sex drive guy, that I think after that point that it was more your initiation and I think his need to talk about it that brought it out more.
Probably. I feel really happy that my wife and I's first experience of sexuality was with one another. Well, I just think that we didn't have the painful experiences a lot of people have of having lots of boyfriends and girlfriends before they commit to somebody. I think that can leave you really scarred, actually. It's painful. It's painful to really invest into somebody and get really close to somebody and then separate. And usually, I mean, I don't know, there's probably good reasons why people separate, but I think a lot of it is just that you just decide you don't really like the person. You start to see things about the person that you didn't see initially, just like what happens in marriage, except that in marriage, you're committed to one another. So once you start seeing the things you don't like about that person, you work to move beyond them. But when you're just in a casual relationship, there's not that strong need to do that. Because you can just go find somebody else.
I think a lot of the times, though, in the beginning, like when people have their first relationships, they really want them to work. Like they really feel like they love the other person. And then, then it's really painful when you break up. So that I think that kind of leads to the more casual sex of like friends with benefits where, oh, I don't really care whether or not you're here tomorrow because we had a great time tonight. And I think that's kind of driving that culture of wanting to protect yourself from getting hurt. But I think one of the great benefits of saving yourself till marriage is that you get to feel wholly invested into somebody and you get that return back to you and you're not really trying to protect yourself for fear that you might get hurt. I mean, you still hurt each other in marriage too, but it's not like this devastating loss of somebody that you invested all your love into. And also, there's not the comparison to previous relationships. I think it's definitely worth it to wait. That's my advice to kids. And it's not easy, but I think that it's a very common phrase, like the best things in life don't come easy. I think that as young parents with kids, I definitely want to level it up from where my parents were at. I want to have conversations with my kids and I want to be open with them. I want to answer their questions. I want them to feel free to ask questions. But I think at the same time, providing a good example of what a healthy relationship is and what that can be like and why that's worth waiting for. I think that's kind of like the best of both worlds, where they're not just being told what to do, but they can also see what are the benefits of waiting through that period of adolescence.
I agree with my wife, of course. I don't have any regrets and I feel really happy about the way that I live my life. But I mean, I really wish that my parents had talked with me more, just guided me more. I feel like I kind of had to figure it out on my own. And I have mixed feelings about that because to some degree, I think that my parents didn't talk to me so much about it because they didn't feel qualified or they didn't feel comfortable with the topic. They didn't have a very good relationship themselves. So I might not have even been able to receive their guidance or to receive their advice because I would have felt it was kind of hypocritical. But I think that despite that, I was still able to follow the lifestyle that they encouraged me to live, and I think that was smart. It was definitely. I'm happy with the way our life has turned out. I think that I know a lot of people, they want to, you see somebody you like, somebody that's attractive to you, and you want to experience that. And the challenge with that is like you end up living your life just chasing your feelings. And it's a very, I would say, a very bad way to make decisions on very important things in your life, like your long-lasting relationships.
I think it's kind of a common myth or idea that, once you're married, sex goes downhill, or it's not fun, it's not exciting, it's not new anymore. And I think that kind of scares people away from marriage and committed relationships.
Yeah, they think they're missing out.
Yeah, but I think you get to build so much when you have a committed relationship. You get to build your future. You get to build a legacy. And that's not something you can do when you're bouncing from one person to another. And that once you get past, there's definitely lulls in your relationship, in your sexual relationship, but then you get to discover something new that's exciting and you didn't even know that it was there before. And you don't even get to that point with somebody that you're only with for a few months, or you don't actually get to know them really deeply. So I think that's my advice for anybody who's wondering whether or not marriage and waiting for marriage is worth it.
You get the sex that's bundled together with the deep intimacy about knowing, just there's like a complete trust, and there's a vulnerability, emotional vulnerability between the two people that you've built up over years, and going through struggles together, going through difficulties together, going through periods of time where you didn't feel the emotions of love, where you didn't feel a passion, but going over those hills and coming closer together, and raising a family together, and all these things. I think that's really more the way sex is meant to be enjoyed than just the physical actions. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.